Welcome everyone to episode 1 of Endgame. I'm your host, Christopher Halali. I'm looking forward to a phenomenal show with you all and really excited for all of the great things that we're going to talk about and the important people that we're going to talk with. Now, this is, as everyone knows, day 20 of the war imposed on Iran by the US and by Israel. There's a lot to cover here, and I'd like to introduce my first guest. My first guest today is Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Aguilar, who was a 25-year veteran of the United States Army, deployed multiple times to combat zones, and also was a member of the Special Forces, a Green Beret in the U.S. Army. He's very well known as the whistleblower, who covered much of what was going on in Gaza and helped blow the whistle on the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation and a lot of the war crimes that were happening. Welcome, Lieutenant Colonel Aguilar. It's a real pleasure to have you on the show and to finally meet you here.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be on, and thank you for inviting me.
It's my pleasure. It's my pleasure. And I also, as you know, as I mentioned in our communications, I also was a member of the U.S. Army. I think both of us as former U.S. Army officers, you, of course, a higher rank and having left a lot sooner, a lot longer you were in. I left a lot sooner for my disagreements, but I think you and I share a lot that we can discuss here. And the first thing I want to do is I want to get your perspective about what you're seeing now. We're at day 20 of this war on Iran. What are you seeing? What's your assessment so far of the operations that are going on and the resilience of the Iranian nation?
I have a very negative assessment of the U.S. strategy, and that assessment is only being reinforced from what I assessed on the opening days of this war. We went in without a strategy. We underestimated the adversary. We overestimated our capability. We did not consider logistics, maintenance, and support in fighting this war. And now we have the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, going back to Congress to ask for $200 billion to fund this out until who knows when. We still have no clearly stated objectives. So in the time that this war was going to last a few days to maybe a week to now weeks to maybe months to perhaps longer, is clear to me that this will become another abyss of a conflict with no way out. In terms of Iranian resilience, it's remarkable. The Iranians have demonstrated not only resilience in their resolve as a military, as a society, in their leadership, but also in the depth of their asymmetric warfare capability. And though the United States has claimed that their Navy has been sunk and their Air Force has been destroyed, those aren't the critical capabilities that Iran poses in this war. The most effective capability that Iran poses is its asymmetric capability with its one-way drone technology and capability, with its highly developed missile capability. And Iran understands the long game. And what I mean by that is a few moves in the beginning that is going to succeed for Iran is the isolation and the wedge between the US and GCC states in claiming legitimately that US bases in the region, in the area of responsibility from which missiles are fired from into Iran, or which Iranian missiles are shot out of the sky, make those bases legitimate military targets. And they put their money where their mouth is and executed that with precision and with restraint. And they also, in the control of the Strait of Hormuz, were very selective in their narrative, in that it's closed to the United States and Israel. It's open to everyone else. And then furthermore, that the exchange through the Strait of Hormuz, the monetary instrument of exchange, is no longer the dollar or the petrodollar, it's the Chinese yuan, which strategically is a pretty clever move. So what we're seeing in this is that Iran is winning the strategy. Iran is winning the long game. Iran is holding its own against two nuclear powers and advanced militaries. And they're doing so with their own capabilities. And do they have support from Russia and China and others? Sure, they do. But that's to be expected. So I foresee more losses for U.S. forces. And I fear what this administration will resort to in terms of either a large-scale ground war or potentially the use of a nuclear weapon.
I fear the same. I fear the same. And one thing that I've spoken about and I've done some research on and been able to share with our audience is that Iran's military doctrine follows what's called the decentralized mosaic defense, which is very much taken from, a combination of asymmetric and hybrid war that we've seen over the past century. We saw it with Chairman Mao in China. We saw it with Che. We saw it with Ho Chi Minh and, the Vietnamese. We've seen it in Angola, in Algeria. So the Iranians also had 20 years to watch the U.S. in Afghanistan and in Iraq. Two neighboring countries, they were able to see U.S. operations on the ground. They were able to see the resistance and how the resistance worked on that. You yourself are a combat veteran, and you also are a recipient of the Bronze Star Medal with V for Valor device, which of course is no small feat, and also a Purple Heart recipient. And you experienced in that event that gave you the Purple Heart, you experienced some shrapnel wounds and an IED explosion that nearly took your eyesight, from what I read. So I want to ask you, a lot of politicians, military analysts, intelligence officials have said that Iran was the main responsible party for these IEDs. They were the ones that were supporting the resistance. Of course, we know the resistance was not monolithic in Iraq. You had Sunni resistance and former Ba'ath Party resistance. You had Shia. You had other groups non-aligned. You had then the emergence of different branches of Al-Qaeda and then ISIS eventually. I want to ask you, what do you make as somebody who served? You served in Mosul. You served in other operations in both Iraq and Afghanistan. What do you make of the so-called Iranian threat? And how do you calculate that with today's war and the justification to go into that war?
Does Iran possess proxy capability and asymmetric capability through proxy forces in the region? Yes. Why wouldn't they? They have been under attack and surrounded by U.S. forces in the region for decades, and they have conducted no attacks against the United States directly, nor have there been any plans or intelligence from the U.S. intelligence community that they ever had a plan to do so. So when you look at the threats that the U.S. faced in Iraq and in Afghanistan, the primary threat that the U.S. faced asymmetrically and in an insurgent conflict was Al-Qaeda. The branch of Al-Qaeda being Al-Qaeda in Iraq, which, because of failed foreign policy, because of failed U.S. foreign policy, dating back to the Mujahideen and the establishment of Al-Qaeda, or the base, at the end of the Soviet war in Afghanistan, U.S. failed policy is what created Al-Qaeda. U.S. failed foreign policy is what created Al-Qaeda in Iraq and gave it justification and gave it momentum and energy in Iraq. The U.S. created that, not Iran. Did Iran equip proxies with advanced IED technology? Sure. In protection of their interests in the region, because the United States has demonstrated time and time again that we know no bounds when it comes to invading countries. At this time, remember, we had forces in Iraq and we had forces in Afghanistan. Where does that put Iran? Literally right in the middle, against a threat that they're in a very tough situation, in that you can't defend yourself because then you look like the aggressor. And if you wait to be attacked, then you're you're defenseless. You know, and this is exactly what we saw with how this war was initiated. The war against Iran that we're now on the 20th day was started by the United States and Israel under the pretense of, and this is confusing, and follow along, but this is the pretense of which the United States started this war. We, the United States, struck to preempt a responsive attack to Iran as a from Iran to Israel as a preemptive attack to what Israel might do, which we didn't know they would do, but we told that they were might. And if they did, then Iran would respond, and therefore we had to strike first. It makes no sense. So when you look at in the region, the forces that we fought were grown from local movements. As you said perfectly, the terrorist organizations in Iraq and in Afghanistan weren't monolithic. There wasn't one overarching terrorist group. There's nuance to that. And as I said, was there technology in Iraq that could be linked back to technology from Iran? Sure. That is regional asymmetric warfare. The United States has done, is doing, and continues to do the exact same thing in Ukraine, in all parts of the world, in Southeast Asia, in Western Asia, in Central Asia. So the United States does that as well. So when you look at the interests of Iran in the region at the time and now, they're under threat. And the targets, I would say, those, you know, the targets in Iraq were legitimate military targets. U.S. military forces operating in Iraq are legitimate military targets. We can't say that your forces are legitimate to strike, but ours aren't. That's not how war is fought. There's equal ground. So is it devastating? Is it horrible that people that I served with were potentially killed in this war because of that? Yes, but I don't blame Iran. I blame the failed policies of the United States government and why we were fighting in Iraq in the first place, of why we were fighting in Afghanistan in the first place, of why we're fighting this war in the first place. And it all goes back to fighting wars for Israel.
On that note, I'd like to put up, we have a map here of the U.S. bases in the region. And I'd like to put that up on the screen if we can, so that our viewers understand that you are absolutely right. First of all, Iran is in the center. Look at all those bases surrounding historically. I mean, Afghanistan no longer had bases, but for 20 plus years, it had bases. I mean, when you look at that map, what is Iran supposed to do but feel threatened, feel isolated? And it feels like that failed containment policy from the Cold War. We're going to just surround countries and basically create siege conditions. Not only do we surround them and create these siege conditions, you know, with these military bases, we also economically sanction them. And then we end up doing a hybrid warfare against them because we foment color revolutions, we assassinate scientists, we assassinate political leaders, we assassinate military leaders, like the assassination of General Soleimani and General Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis under the first Trump administration. I mean, what is Iran supposed to do in its own neighborhood? It's not like the Iranians came to Mexico or Canada to carry out this hybrid warfare. They're in their neighborhood, they're in their sphere.
Can you imagine if Iran had numerous military bases in Mexico along the Mexico-U.S. border and in Canada along the Canada-U.S. border, and constantly made moves to sanction us, to strangle us, to be an existential threat to the existence of our country? What would we do? And also looking at that, the bases in the region that you just demonstrated on that map, there are more. And what is also important to understand is that those are large bases with a large number of troops. These aren't military outposts or fire bases, forward operating bases. These are substantially large bases, especially when you consider in Qatar, where U.S. Central Command Forward is located, one of the largest airfields and military bases outside of the U.S. and certainly in the region. The number of troops we have stationed in Iraq, the number of troops we have stationed in Kuwait, the number of troops we have stationed in Jordan, the number of troops we have in Lebanon, Somalia, Yemen, and not just the Levant and West Asia, but also Central Asia. Troops in all throughout Central Asia, also in Europe. So when you think about the existential threat to Iran, they are obligated to defend their interests in the region. And as you noted, what political leader, national leader, U.S. leader, military commander has Iran assassinated?
None.
None that I can remember.
None. You know, you're absolutely right. Listen, the points you bring up are sound, and I think that many Americans and many people in the West need to hear them. I want to thank you so much for coming on to the show. I want to thank you for your hard work. We're going to have you back as we continue, because this doesn't look like it's ending anytime soon. We're going to have you back to discuss more. Your perspective is valuable. It's very important, especially for former military personnel, to speak out against this war, which nobody wanted to begin with, except some elite class that we now know who dragged us into it. So I want to thank you again, sir. Really appreciate it. Look forward to seeing you again on the show.
Thank you so much, and I appreciate the opportunity, and we will talk again, and I look forward to it.
Thank you so much. So everyone, I want to now welcome our second guest. I want to welcome a second guest who's coming on, but I want to emphasize that what you experienced and what you saw there was a decorated U.S. Army veteran who's speaking out against the war.
Hi,
I mean,
Karen,
that's
can you
huge.
hear us?
That's huge. There's a lot of military personnel,
Thank you very
intelligence,
much.
former intelligence officials and analysts, people in politics who are speaking out. We saw the resignation of Joe Kent, which is the highest resignation so far in the U.S. Government. So I think that this is important. I'd like to now bring in our second guest tonight, who herself is very distinguished. Lieutenant Colonel Karen Kwiatkowski, who is a retired U.S. Air Force Lieutenant Colonel, whose assignments include the Pentagon and the National Security Agency. Welcome. It's a pleasure to have you on the program tonight.
Well, thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. I want to get started. You are someone who was also on the academic side of things, looking at military doctrine, looking at assessments, trying to figure out policy as well in your different roles. How do you first assess what's going on the ground? What are your perspectives about the war in Iran that none of us, everybody was, I think, expecting something to happen, but not at this scale and not with this kind of barbarism that we're seeing today?
Yeah. The United States has teamed up with Israel, but we did not agree upon our objectives. Okay, we're both fighting. Each of us is fighting a slightly different war. So that's one complication. And the other thing is that Trump was misled, I think, in many ways about this. And he really, truly expected this to be a larger and more enriching kind of regime change operation, like he had just done in Venezuela. So I think the planning, there was no planning for, well, what if it doesn't work in the first 3 days? Or what if, it doesn't end? And what if we don't get that regime change? And what if we can't really decimate the missile and drone capability of Iran? So they didn't really have plans for this. And I think a key indicator that we did not plan for this is that 10 days in to this war, I think 10 or 11 days, 2 weeks into the war, we suddenly realized we might want Marines. And so they asked for the Marine Expeditionary Unit to steam full speed to the Arabian Sea. So that shows a poor planning. It shows a lack of planning. It shows a set of really mistaken and wrong assumptions that were made by the White House. at least in their sense of what they were trying to accomplish in this war. Israel's a whole another story, because Israel was going to do this war with or without us. Of course, obviously it couldn't. So this is why this is a war for Israel. And their agenda is a little bit different. And so they are doing what they need to do to pursue their agenda. And I think also their assumption was that Iran would fall, or at least beg for mercy, much sooner. And then, of course, now we don't see that happening anytime soon.
You're absolutely right. Of course, were rocked by the resignation of Joe Kent, who is the highest-ranking official. I'd like to play the clip, if we can, from the Tucker interview that happened, and then get your feedback on this, because I think it's a really historic moment for everyone who's watching this unfold.
I cannot in good conscience support the ongoing war in Iran. Iran posed no imminent threat to our nation. Iran posed no imminent threat to our nation. How did you reach that conclusion?
I think this is key. I mean, this would be more challenging to explain had the Secretary of State, the President, and the Speaker of the House not come out and said that we conducted this attack at this time because the Israelis were about to do so. So that takes away the argument that there was an imminent threat, as in Iran was planning to attack us immediately. That just simply did not exist.
I mean, this is huge. I mean, we have the former director of United States National Counterterrorism Center, who resigned, number one. The first time in my lifetime that I think this is the first official to ever at this level publicly call out Israel for its malign and malignant role in the U.S. government. Of course, we have survivors from USS Liberty. We have so many others who've spoken out about the crimes of the Israeli government against the U.S. and those who are calling out AIPAC, for example, Professor John Mersheimer and many others. But this is the first official at this level, a decorated war veteran, who's saying this. What do you make of this? Is this a real change? Is this a moment of transformation in U.S. politics?
I think it's an evolutionary change, because when we think back, and of course that's my experience was with the 2002 build up to the war, the invasion of Iraq, and we knew they were lying, they knew they were lying, but I was able to watch how it was done and the Israeli role in it, in producing information, not intelligence, but information that could kind of get around and get through the normal intelligence process directly into the hands of political decision makers. And then, of course, being used by those vulnerable to prosecution. This idea, I was just following orders. It's still a fresh message. Okay. Don't ever be caught just following orders, particularly when they are illegal. And our government has actually, not even Joe Kent, I mean, the people he mentioned that have said this is a war for Israel have all admitted that this is an illegal war. If it was a war for Israel, then we should have gone to Congress and had a congressional declaration of war, or otherwise gotten Congress's permission and also had Congress put some parameters on what it is that we're doing, because there's actually two wars happening. There's Israel's war, which is very much a war of expansion into Lebanon. And then there's America's war, which is, well, we have these excuses, but mainly it's because Israel wanted us to be there. And those aren't even coordinated, okay? As we saw with this recent attack on the gas field, Trump said, oh, I didn't know about it. And then Israel said, well, we told you we were going to do it, and you said it was okay. They're fussing and fighting amongst themselves. That's not a good look.
You're absolutely right. I'd like to play. I want to go up the chain of command. We all thought that Tulsi Gabbard might come out because she came out years ago and said no war on Iran. She made a big campaign, sort of a promise about it during the run that she had in 2020. And I met her in New Hampshire during the primary time. I met her in Hanover, New Hampshire at Dartmouth College. And I asked her, I thanked her for that principled stand, but I also questioned her about Ukraine. And it was then when I realized that she also was not being totally honest, because she still supported funding and arming Ukraine for defensive purposes as they were, struggling in the Donbass. So I want to play the clip of her now, and we'll come back to this issue right away.
Was it the assessment of the intelligence community that there was a, quote, imminent nuclear threat posed by the Iranian regime, yes or no?
Senator, the only person who can determine what is and is not an imminent threat is the president.
False. This is the worldwide threats hearing where you present to Congress national intelligence, timely, objective, and independent of political considerations. Was it the assessment of the intelligence community that, as the White House claimed on March 1st, there was a, quote, imminent nuclear threat posed by the Iranian regime? Yes or no?
Once again, Senator, the intelligence community has provided the inputs that make up this annual threat assessment.
You won't answer the question.
It is the nature of the imminent threat that the president has to make that determination based on a collection and volume
You're here
of
to be
information and
timely.
intelligence that he is provided with.
You're here to be timely, objective, and independent of political considerations.
Exactly what I'm doing.
So we have the Director of National Intelligence, who herself is a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army Reserve. She's a civil affairs officer, but of course we know civil affairs, psychological operations. It's all under that category there in the Army, in that particular one, which is of course interesting enough. But I want to get your feedback. We have a DNI who is supposed to put forward the intelligence to the president, and clearly at this point, either the president didn't acknowledge it, but from what we know, the president has sidelined her on other issues, for example, in Venezuela. What's going on here? What's going on with this administration? What's going on with Tulsi?
Yeah, well, with Tulsi, it is unfortunate. Now, she has, her politics are, she's a Zionist, she is pro-Israel, and that is not necessarily a bad perspective, but if that colors how you do your job for the United States of America, then it's a handicap. And so she has that handicap. She has not quit. I mean, you would have thought she would have quit back when Trump said, I don't care what she says. Remember his airplane interview as he was getting on his plane? They said, well, Tulsi said something. This was before the 12-day war that Trump launched. And he said, I don't care what she says. And she did not resign. And she's covering for him in this, to the Congress yesterday in her meeting with them. So, yeah, you just can't count on Tulsi. I know many people are scraping the Tulsi Gabbard bumper stickers off their cars. She will not regain this. She's going down the path of Dan Bongino, who used to have a great podcast, a very popular number 3 podcast. It's like number 80 now, and it's probably going to get even lower on that podcast list because, he's lost his credibility. And Tulsi has, people were talking about Tulsi as on a presidential ticket. This would make them very happy. And that's not the case anymore. So she has wasted that political capital that she had. It's hard to say what's really going on with her, but I think it's just, maybe we expect too much of our politicians. And this is why I think the Joe Kent thing is so interesting, because he has stood up and he is very clearly, he speaks clearly. He has great knowledge about what he's talking about, and his political awareness is very good. He understands. In his interview with Tucker, he said, I know they're going to come after me. They have to come after me. He understands that. And that's really good, because I think Americans, as a people, we've learned everything we needed to learn, but we've learned a lot in 25 years.
That's for sure. That's for sure. Speaking of learning over long periods of time, your doctoral dissertation was about the Reagan doctrine in Angola, from what I read. And I'm fascinated about this because I also was a U.S. Army officer. I'm fascinated about military doctrine. This was my thing. They used to joke that I was instead of carrying a rifle, I was carrying books to combat. But I think it's important to have a military, to have a history, to understand context, to understand the theory behind it. We had the Reagan doctrine. We had the Powell doctrine. We had the Bush doctrine. Is there a Trump doctrine? And if there is, what is it? Or is it developing? Or are we just kind of, shooting blindly in the dark?
Yeah. Well, no, I think in Trump's mind, he has a Trump doctrine. And he is a person who likes to be the boss. In fact, he has to be the boss, right? I mean, in the military, you're in the military, I'm in the military. They say to be a good leader, you need to be a good follower. You have to learn that. You have to learn both sides of it, right? And I think that's something that we try to develop in all of our people, to be able to follow and advise, and also to lead and decide. These are all important things. You can't just have one or the other. And Trump is a leader without the ability to really follow very well. He doesn't, he makes up his mind. He trusts his judgment, and sometimes that's not a good thing. Clearly, this war is a disaster, and it will be a worse disaster before we get out of it. Okay, this is for the United States. This is the worst war we've ever been in. Okay, this is not a money-making war. This is the kind of war that guts our financial and economic strength and our military strength. Okay, and Congress there's not enough money to rebuild all these old systems and newer, expensive systems that are being destroyed in this war. So we stumbled into something that has great negative ramifications for the United States. But Trump stumbled into it. Americans didn't stumble into it. We knew nothing about it, okay? The intelligence community is saying there's no need for a war. There are many options. The diplomatic community, in theory, was saying we are negotiating to get a better situation and also to improve trade and all these other things that make America great, So, yeah, Trump, he's ill-informed, but it's his own fault. I would think if Trump himself was asking Tulsi Gabbard, because he sidelined her, he's not asking her anything, but let's assume that wasn't the case and he was asking Tulsi like that congressman was asking her. I think she would tell him the truth. Okay, but he's not asking her. He doesn't need to know things that he doesn't want to know. And he doesn't need to know them because he's Donald Trump. And he's got enough sycophants around him who are telling him how great he is. And, Joe Kent made the point, not in a negative way, just a very subtle way. He said, when we negotiate with Iran, there's a way out of this. And obviously it is to negotiate. But when we do it, Joe said we should send some real diplomats, or no, he said different diplomats, right? He said we should send some different diplomats there. Okay, that's kind of a big slam in a nice way of Witkoff and
Kushner,
his son-in-law, Kushner. And if you think about it, let's take three real estate guys: Trump, Witkoff, and Kushner, all friends, known each other for a long time. Who's the smartest foreign policy guy in that group of three? It's Trump.
Trump.
Right? Now, does that make Trump good at foreign policy? Does that make him smart? No. But relative to the people around him, he's top dog. Like if I'm Witkoff and I'm Kushner, I'm like, what should we do? What should you do? And Trump says, well, what do you know? And they tell him a bunch of stuff they don't know, that they think they know because they don't know what they're doing. They're not diplomats. They're not nuclear people. They don't know anything except how to make real estate deals. So they tell him what they know, and then Trump processes it in his wonderful real estate brain, and he says, "Okay, this is what we'll do." And they're like, "Man, you are the smartest thing. You're like, man, what would we do without you, Mr. Trump, Donald, whatever they call him?" And this is the world he lives in. Okay. So he's not asking the intelligence community. And of course, the Israelis, they know this. They know how he operates. They know how he works. Well, come on. I don't have evidence that he was involved in Epstein stuff, but apparently there is plenty of evidence that for years and years and years, he is part of this elite circle. Israel used that for blackmail. For all I know, the CIA used it to blackmail. You know, the CIA has its own interests as well. I mean, this information is used to shape outcomes amongst elites and global leaders and business people in a way that whoever's managing, whoever wants to leverage it is going to do. So, you know, they know Trump very well. Okay. They know what levers to push. And maybe the levers are flattery. Maybe the levers are, hey, we love you, man. You can trust us. We're, you know, like bro Intel, right? Like Kent was talking about. There's the Intel bros, you know. This hasn't made its way through the system yet, but let me tell you, here's what we know, Mr. Trump, and you're the guy that knows it. So that's one way to get to Trump. And another way, of course, is like they get to a lot of people, and particularly our congressmen, and that is through, you know, not necessarily hardcore blackmail, but suggestions of blackmail. Well, you know, remember that day? And we saw so much of that in the Epstein letters, you know, where he would kind of very subtly remind some of his cohorts, you remember that time we had that party? Yeah, remember that? And that's all you have to say. That's not blackmail. That's just reminiscing about a great party they had, right? That doesn't mean anything, but we know what it means. And so they have ways to get Trump to do what they want, but also he is himself vulnerable to flattery, doesn't trust a lot of people. So if you can get in that inner circle of trust, like that, you know, the circle of trust, you're going to be okay. And so Israel is in his circle of trust, and he doesn't realize yet that, you know, that they're destroying our country because that's in their interest to do that. And meanwhile, to benefit from our military, which is what they're doing. Americans are dying for Israeli wars. This is in their interest as they see it. And you can't really fault them for doing it. It's our fault for being subject to it. It's Trump's fault. It's other presidents' fault. It's the fault of the Israeli-occupied Congress that we have.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure. No, you're absolutely right. And I think people are waking up to it. I want to thank you so much for your years. It's been decades of activism. When I was protesting the Iraq War, when I was a young man, and then I got in the military, your work was already well known. And I thank you and the other former military and intelligence professionals for speaking out. We're going to have you back for sure. And it looks like this war is not wrapping up anytime soon. So there's going to be, I'm sure, plenty to talk about. This is day 20, and people are already saying, get ready for the long haul for some of the officials who want to take this forward. So thank you again, Lieutenant Colonel Kwiatkowski. It was a real pleasure to have you on. Look forward to having you again very soon.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank
you. So we got the perspective of not one, but two former U.S. military officers, and not low-ranking. These are both former lieutenant colonels. That's at the field grade of the U.S. military officer corps. And now, for the Iranian perspective, I am so happy and honored to be joined by Professor Seyed Mohammad Marandi, Professor of English Literature and Orientalism at the University of Tehran. And for those who don't know, he was also part of an advisor and part of the negotiation team during the Iran nuclear talks that led to the JCPOA, what seems like a lifetime ago. So look forward to speaking to Professor Marandi. And I think it's important for people
can you hear us? Hello, Professor Marandi?
On the ground in Iran, because there's a lot
okay, perfect. Thank you.
On a lot
we'll
of
be
media,
live
especially in the West, about this perspective, about speaking about Iran and speaking from the Iranian perspective, speaking from the ground. And that's important. We need that. We need that now more than ever, especially as this war, this artificial war, this war of choice, as so many have rightfully called it, as this has been put forward. So hopefully we have Professor Marandi with us now. Professor Marandi, it's a pleasure to see you. And we were just in Moscow not too long ago together. I'm happy to see you here. I've been watching all of your interviews. I've been seeing what's going on. Of course, I'm happy to communicate with you. I have not been able to communicate with any of my family members, sadly, in Iran. I know the situation is very difficult for all of us in the diaspora. Those of us who don't support this war on our homeland, who don't support this war on our people. I want to ask you first and foremost, what's the mood in Iran? What's the mood on the ground? I know that you're always in interviews, but what are you hearing from family, from friends, and from the neighborhood and communities that you are in contact with?
I do move around a lot, and I do go places. And it's quite clear that the population has mobilized. They are united, and we've seen crowds of people across the country every night, and sometimes during races, very large crowds in Tehran, every night in 20 different neighborhoods. They gather each in the tens of thousands. In a couple of instances, over 100,000 people. So literally millions of people in Tehran, and of course many millions across the country. They come to the streets every night under missile fire, and we've had numerous instances where missiles were fired at these demonstrations. On Friday, I was participating in one in Tehran. It was the International Quds Day for Jerusalem Day, in solidarity with the Palestinian people. It's every last Friday of the month of Ramadan. And in this very enormous demonstration, the U.S.-Israeli coalition, they bombed the demonstration, and a woman was murdered. She was martyred. Last night, the same thing happened in Anzali city in the north, and they struck a demonstration. And a couple of days ago, they did the same in Hamadan, the city of Hamadan. This goes unnoticed in the West. It's not reflected in the media, but the footage is there. And it's been online, especially the one in Tehran, because the president was there, the head of the judiciary was there, the late chair of the Supreme National Security Council, Dr. Larijani, was there, the foreign minister was there. So it went viral online, but Western media outlets would not allow it to be shown in their media, because their narrative is that the so-called regime is unpopular, whereas the reality on the ground is that the Islamic Republic of Iran has always had a strong degree of legitimacy among the public, and today it's gone through the roof. And even some of those young kids who were tagging along during the violent riots, they've changed. Their worldview has changed. 3 young students that I know of at my faculty, they've contacted me and asked how they could help. And their worldview has been completely shattered. Excuse me. Shattered, because they have seen what the United States does to little kids in elementary schools, and it sees what the United States does by assassinating people. And they see how Western media is silent in the face of all these atrocities when they bomb hospitals and they bomb all sorts of infrastructure that's linked to ordinary people. They bomb gymnasiums. They murdered a large number of young women who were playing volleyball in a gymnasium. They bombed the Iranian national radio and television multiple times. The last time I was, well, not the last time, the next to last time that I was on Iranian TV, they bombed it literally an hour later. So people in Iran are very much united, and I think that the United States has deeply miscalculated. And we are seeing that on the battlefield, and we are seeing that on the streets of Tehran and on the streets across the country.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think many analysts are starting to wake up to this fact, if they weren't already aware, that this has had the opposite effect, what the CIA calls blowback, that this, in fact, has cemented support for the government, even those, like you said, who were liberals or reformists, others who had been in opposition, those who had tagged along, as you pointed out. I've seen images and videos of people that I wouldn't have assumed would be supportive of the government as much as they are. And there's a rally around the flag effect. There's a real patriotism. Sadly, the diaspora is on the opposite side of the equation, and they have been foaming at the mouth for regime change, foaming at the mouth for more bombing. In fact, going on national television in some countries, calling for the bombs not to stop, which to me is absolutely barbaric. It's evil. It's satanic behavior, in my opinion. I want to ask you, we have a map here I want to put up about of the Strait of Hormuz. I want our viewers to see it because a lot of people didn't recognize and didn't realize what the Iranians were saying for decades was that this strait was so critical, so important to the world. And as you see it there, this is a very narrow point where a lot of 20% or so of the world's petroleum products cross through every day, not to mention the import exports from the region. Now, you so eloquently said, I believe it was yesterday, to a journalist that Iran will keep the chokehold. This is the neck of the entire Epstein class. This is the neck of the Epstein world order, as I like to say, because right now they're feeling the economic pain of what's going on, and they're seeing it in the markets. And you made it clear that Iranians will not relent. You yourself was part of a negotiating team. Iran will not negotiate, and that Iran is prepared to carry this to the end. What do you make of Iran's resistance now, its resilience? And if, for example, the U.S. Uses these Marines that they've sent out on the expeditionary force, uses some of the assets, increases ground troops, what do you make of this? What will this look like? Where do you see this going? You yourself, as a veteran and as a war veteran yourself.
Well, first, I'd like to point out that the diaspora is not really pro-war. That is a very vocal segment of the diaspora that many of them were people who fled the country after the revolution. They had stolen a lot of money. They were linked to the Shah's regime. And the rest are people who, by and large, or to a large degree, are on the payroll. Tens of thousands of Iranians are on the payroll abroad. In Albania alone, there are 3,000 or 4,000 Iranians who are working in a camp, which is a troll farm. And there are hundreds of Persian language media outlets that are hostile towards Iran. All of them are funded by Western governments. So literally you have tens of thousands of people who, in one way or another, they're funded. And they have family and they have people. So that's a significant number. But also, if someone has a position that is supportive of Iran, life will become very difficult. Getting a job would be very difficult. They get harassed. I think it was in Germany a couple of weeks ago that these monarchists went to a restaurant, if I'm not mistaken, and they tried to force the owner to put a picture of their flag, and that person refused, and they murdered him. So the harassment and threats are there. And of course, these people, they get full support from the West. They can make death threats online on Twitter and nothing will happen. But if someone says something supportive of Iran, they can get removed from social media. So people are incentivized to be quiet. And so I would argue that the majority of the Iranian diaspora is quiet because if they voice their opposition, it could become difficult for them. I've been abroad. I've been among Iranians in the diaspora, and I've never felt uncomfortable in the different places that I've been in. But with regards to the Strait of Hormuz and the war, I think the United States miscalculated. I've always been saying over the years that the Islamic Republic of Iran has a very high degree of popular legitimacy. They unfortunately believe their own propaganda. They produce propaganda using those Iranians often that are on the payroll, and then they believe their own propaganda. And on the other hand, they underestimate Iran's military capabilities. I think that's partially Orientalist and racist. And during the last 3 weeks, I think they've been forced to face reality. Although these people, because of their arrogance, I don't think that they will really learn that much. And so far, we are going to continue to see war. But I think last night, Iran proved that its capabilities are enormous And when the Israeli regime, without doubt, the Israelis bombed the Iranian gas facilities with U.S. consent, and Trump is not telling the truth. But when Iran retaliated, it hit very hard. And Iran announced beforehand that it's going to retaliate because they didn't want anyone in those oil and gas fields to get killed. And some people were saying, why did they do that? This will help them to use air defenses to block the missiles. But Iran gave warnings, and they fired those missiles and drones, and they destroyed all those things that they planned, all those assets that they planned to destroy. And after that, we saw Trump had to retreat. So if the United States escalates by bringing in troops, I think it's only going to lead to the destruction of ships, tankers, and oil and gas installations. And if that happens, then the crisis becomes very long term, and there will be a global depression. As things stand, if the United States meets Iran's demands, then ultimately at some point the Strait of Hormuz can be opened and oil can be exported. But if the United States makes a foolish move to raise the stakes, I think without a doubt it will get much worse for the Americans and the collective West.
I think so, and I think that everybody is watching this very closely, and your analysis is key. The last thing I wanted to mention, breaking news just before we came on the air, was that Iran has now made history as the first nation ever to successfully strike a fifth-generation fighter jet, an F-35 of the U.S. This is unbelievable. And of course, we were told that Iran's air defenses were completely annihilated. The U.S. and Israel have air supremacy and air superiority over Iran. And now look, the Iranian military has been able to successfully hit an F-35. What do you make of this?
Well, first of all, I think one of the things that's happening is that the Iranians are learning a lot about U.S. technology. And I'm sure that the Russians and the Chinese will be very eager to know what Iran has learned, and they'll be very eager to cooperate with Iran to better deal with U.S. technology. So the United States is not only spending many billions of dollars on tens of billions of dollars so far in this disastrous war. And of course, it's losing perhaps by now over $1 trillion because its assets in the Persian Gulf, the Emirates, the Qataris, and the Bahrain, they're all hemorrhaging. No one is ever going to bring their businesses back here. And these are all U.S. assets. So the damage that's been done to U.S. businesses or U.S. linked businesses, or, for example, the oil and gas wealth that would go to the United States to buy bonds and stocks or to buy weapons, that's changed. So the U.S. this is costing the United States a lot at many levels. And of course, the rise of energy prices are going to hit the consumer in the United States and businesses. But also the fact that U.S. States is spending so much on its military and exposing its military capabilities to Iran, that gives Iran and Russia and China and others a very long-term advantage because they learn a lot about U.S. capabilities and U.S. weaknesses, whereas the United States does not yet know much about, for example, China's capabilities because China is not engaged in any conflict. So this is a big loss to the American people. This is a catastrophic situation. But the fact that Iran struck this airplane today shows that Iran has air defenses and that they are waiting for the appropriate moment to bring down. I think that this is just going to get worse and worse for the Americans and American people, but Trump has dug himself into a hole and he's too incompetent and too abnormal to be able to find a way out.
I think you're right. I think you're right. You so often post, I think almost daily, if not every other day, that Iran is the nation of Imam Hussein and that we will never abandon the Palestinian people. That couldn't be more true these days. Those words ring out with truth. I want to thank you so much for coming on the program. Please stay safe. Of course, you're always in our thoughts, and I hope soon to be with you in Tehran. And I hope that Iran will, of course, continue its valiant resistance against this war that was imposed on it. Thank you so much, Professor Marandi, for joining us today. Stay safe, please.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me.
Thank you all so much for joining. This has been Endgame,
Thank you very much,
episode
Professor
1.
Marandi.
We're going to come to you
We'll send
weekly,
the
and we
links,
look forward to bringing
to
you
the
all
clips
of
once we
the
publish
finest
it.
experts,
And,
intellectuals,
yes, stay safe.
politicians,
Bye-bye. We hope to
military
hear from you
leaders,
soon.
and all those throughout our world who are up to date and up to speed with everything that's going on. Thank you again. I'm your host, Christopher Halali. Have a wonderful day. Take care.